I want to get to a question right away. So, hi, Shannon and Dr. Doreen. My question is, how can I teach my soon-to-be 5-year-old son to be more calm? He's constantly on the go. He does periods of time when he sits and plays or watches TV, but most of the day he's moving around, jumping, climbing. His yeast is under control. He's on a GFCF diet and very little juice or sugar a day and no candy at all. He's high functioning. He has really good understanding and good language, just not much conversation. Can be more calm.
Can being more
Can
calm.
being more calm. There we go. Can being more calm be taught? Is there any natural supplement that can help with the calming? And they go on to talk about, and we've answered a question similar to this before, but the person goes on to say there's inappropriate laughter at times. Ask him what's so funny, and he'll just say the show is funny. Even when he's not watching TV, I prompt him to express a little more. Like when I saw Daniel the Tiger show, something funny happened, but it's really hard. I have to prompt him every time he starts giggling. Is there a better way to teach this? And thanks so much, and so glad you're back. Missed your knowledge.
Oh, thank you. That's really nice. So there's so many different issues in here, and I think one of the things we tend to do as parents is we because we're living it, because we're in the life of our kids so much, we kind of globalize and summarize their issues. And if you're a behavior analyst or a psychologist, you do the opposite of that. You break it apart, and you're trying to look at each behavior on its own and not as a global thing. So it's hard when we look at a child and we say he's just extremely hyperactive. And that's absolutely possible. I mean, it is, of course, possible that he also has hyperactivity issues. And that's a little bit separate from some of the other things that he's struggling with, which I'll talk about. If he is generally hyperactive, then the sign for that, the way that we kind of differentiate children who actually have ADHD versus children who don't. And great that you have done the dietary and all of that, and that's fabulous. But when you have ADHD issues, like real ADHD hyperactivity, the way that we differentiate it is by looking at the child when they have an activity that they actually like. And if they like the activity, but they're still very, restless. So they'll do the activity and then they'll have to walk away and come back and continue the activity and walk away and come back, and they keep doing that. Or if they walk away in the middle of something that you're telling them, for instance, those are more signs of actual hyperactivity. As a child, if you have hyperactivity, you're also doing things like you're losing stuff all the time. You misplace things because you're distracted, and you'll place something someplace and you'll forget because you're going at a higher speed. Now, there are also behavioral interventions that can help you in general with activity level, and that it's just scenario specific. So you pick specific times that you want him to increase his calmness. Instead of thinking about it in terms of, I want to reduce his hyperactivity, reverse your thinking and think about, in this specific situation, I want to increase his calmness. And then what you do is you time the amount of time that he's sitting and paying attention to a certain thing, and you gradually increase and you shape the duration of time that he sits. Now, there's just so much you can do with that. If it's an actual biochemical, disturbance or difference, then it's like having had 50 cups of coffee and you're just hyper and you can't slow yourself down. It's hard for kids to do that. So typically, physicians will recommend medications that are appropriate for this, like Ritalin or Adderall, or there's many other stimulants. And with individuals who have actual ADHD, if you give them a stimulant, it works in reverse, right? So these are individuals who, if they had a cup of coffee, would actually slow down a little bit.
Wow.
The opposite of us. Now, you ask about natural type stuff, and I think the only natural thing that I can think of that does tend to slow you down a little bit is valerian. Valerian works like Valium, so it actually slows you down pretty significantly. So you might want to try some of the natural types of medications and supplements, I say, that are out there. But and that sounds like the path that you want to try, and please do try, and there's no harm in valerian. It will just slow you down. So that's one way to look at it, but behaviorally, the thing to look at it is very specific to the situation. For instance, we're talking about he's moving around, jumping, climbing, and so on. So pick a scenario in which he's, let's say, moving around and jumping and climbing, and help him not to do that simply by rewarding longer and longer periods of a different behavior, which is sitting down calmly. So it's kind of like you increase the behavior that is the opposite of jumping around, and therefore it inhibits the jumping around behavior. That is very different than the secondary issue that the parent has brought up, which is talking about something that happened, describing something that happened. Describing something that happened generally requires a certain amount of holding something in memory, and then being able to talk about it. And those are lessons that need to be taught. Yes, they're harder when someone's hyperactive, but they can nevertheless be taught.
Yeah. So I have a question for this viewer. Because they write and say that his yeast is under control. And my question is, what is it that's telling you that his yeast is under control? And I'm asking that as a parent who fights yeast constantly. Because I tend to look at behavior to see if the yeast is under control. And I'm wondering what she's doing to see if the yeast is under control.
And I mean, I assume you would agree with this, but I'm just going to respond to that question from the perspective of many families who tell me that when their child has a sort of a yeast outbreak, they become silly and they're running around and almost what you would look like if you were drunk.
Exactly.
Right? And they run around and they giggle and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of times also what parents tell me and what scientifically makes sense is that when they start treating the yeast, and there's yeast die-off, then the child also exhibits those types of behaviors. So that is certainly a factor that could be present here. It sounds like that he has a very good diet, that he's, the parent is keeping him on very little juice or sugar, no candy. He's GFCF. It sounds like he's doing very well there. And so, as I suggested, valerian root might be one way to go. But then I think you also should probably start rewarding periods of time that are calmer.
Okay, wonderful, great advice. But we're going to go on to another question. Hi, Shannon and Dr. Doreen. I want to start by saying I love your show and please continue. My daughter is 3.5 and was diagnosed high-functioning ASD, SPD, and expressive language disorder. I was using skills, but she was flying through the material relatively quickly. I was trained as a workshop therapist by Katie DeVelbis from Card, Alexandria. I never expected my own child one day to be diagnosed. Is ABA really beneficial for high-functioning kids, and how do I teach social skills when it's me doing them and not a peer? She also received a selective mutism diagnosis, but wouldn't that be autism-related? Thanks in advance. And she sent her email so that we can get back to her as well.
That's terrific. Yeah, so let me just go through this. I don't know what SPD is.
Is that sensory processing disorder?
Sensory processing. The reason I don't know it is because it's not really a diagnosis.
There we go.
Okay, so we have autism, sensory processing problems, and expressive language disorder, which shouldn't be diagnosed because autism will overcompass that. But anyway, and this is a parent who was going through the program, and Katie was a supervisor at CARD, and she isn't any longer, but I'm glad that you were trained and received workshop supervision through her. That's wonderful. I know, that's kind of crazy that now you have a child on the spectrum. It happens more and more now. Obviously, it's going to hit all of our lives.
Yes.
ABA really beneficial for high-functioning kids? Yes, it is. It becomes much less... So there's different types of behavioral intervention, of course. Applied behavior analysis does not necessarily mean that it has to be discrete trial formats, right? So one of the behavioral interventions that I find really works very well with our higher functioning kids is cognitive behavioral intervention. Well, there's many different forms of cognitive CBT, cognitive behavioral therapies, and they are very much behavioral, and so they fall under the larger umbrella of applied behavioral interventions, but they involve some more thinking and problem solving and that sort of thing. So it is quite different from the basic type of discrete trial ABA that most people do. It's very, very different. But it does go on the same principles, which is that you teach a thinking pattern or you teach a thought process and reinforce it. So it's very much the same in that what we're teaching the individual to increase, what we're trying to increase is not overt behavior, but it's covert behavior, it's sort of thinking, certain thinking patterns. So if you think about, like, let's say someone who has, is suicidal, and their thinking about themselves generally is very wrong. It's like, I'm doomed, the world is coming to an end, the worst things can happen, and so on. And that becomes kind of what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you end up just convincing yourself that things are worse and worse and worse. And in cognitive behavior therapy, you teach that individual to think very differently and to actually start to be aware of and recognize things in life that are good and historical things that prove that things will work themselves out. You just change their thinking, and then you reward that very, very concretely and acutely, and then the individual's thinking gradually changes. So it's sort of the same as behavior therapy, but more covert. So yes, it's very beneficial to high-functioning kids. How do you teach social skills when it's you doing them and not the peer? So the process of social skills intervention for us is that because our kids usually will pay attention to an adult more, and because the adult is trained to maintain the child's attention, to reward them appropriately, and so on, the adult is the best person to start these interventions. But you always have to generalize to peers, especially with social skills, even with younger kids when you do play therapy, when you teach them how to play. So all social skills, all lessons in general, whether it's language or play or social or anything, the adult will teach it first, but then you will practice it with peers. And that is really, really important. Otherwise, you find that our children tend to just want to interact with adults, because adults are not only more interesting, but but the adult will always cater the conversation and the interaction to the child. And other peers don't do that. And that's really important for our kids to know that the peer is not interested, they're walking away, I got to change my topic, that sort of thing. Yeah. So that's how it works. And he also received a selective mutism diagnosis, but wouldn't that be autism related? So selective mutism is one of those kind of interesting little disorders. It could certainly be part of the autism. It's very, selective mutism is usually diagnosed, like for instance, with children who have had abusive types of situations in their past and they don't speak. They choose not to speak. There's other types of things that can lead to selective mutism as well. It's generally considered to be a control function. So in other words, the child is anxious and tries to control some aspect of his or her own life and therefore doesn't speak, or has been traumatized and therefore doesn't speak. So it's unusual to give a diagnosis of selective mutism when you have ASD. I don't know any cases that would have received both diagnoses. Yes, generally with children with ASD, they may just not interact because they choose not to, because when we interact socially, typically developing people, when you interact socially, the reason you interact is because you're getting something out of it, and that something that you get out of it is meaningful. Mm-hmm. And usually what you get out of social interaction is the satisfaction that you are somehow socially involved, you care about the person that you're talking to, you feel heightened level of self-esteem from interacting with people socially, you gain knowledge, perhaps you're motivated to impress them or motivate, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times our kids don't have those same reinforcers. They don't gain that same level of reward from the social interaction. They prefer to isolate and engage in some sort of self-stimulatory behavior or something that's more interesting to themselves. It's just a matter of what's more reinforcing to you. Like I find, I don't know about you, Shannon, but I find as I age, I love being alone much more than being in social environments. And our reinforcers change.
Yeah.
So that's really what that's about. But for this parent, I really recommend skills to you, because you've been on skills already. I don't know if if you've used the higher level areas of skills, which is the cognition area. We actually have a whole different skills program called Advanced Cognition. And Advanced Cognition consists of the areas that are more important for children like this. I think it includes adaptive skills, but it's mostly focused on the cognitive skills, social skills, and executive functioning skills. And all of those areas, you're using a much more CBT, cognitive behavior therapy approach, a much more natural environment therapy approach, and that will definitely help the child.
And first, I want to say you're allowed to have time alone, because I don't know what that's about.
I know.
You have 3 kids, and you'll have to tell us how to find time to be alone.
That's why I don't sleep, because the only time I have alone is like past 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I find myself just staying up later, and that's bad,
Yeah.
So.
Well, on the flip side, my mother used to do this, and I never understood it. My mother would get up at 4:30 in the morning to be able to read her book.
I know.
And I find myself doing that now. That's not good either.
Yeah.
Because at 9:15, I'm, you know.
I know.
But okay, I just want to say too that I think sometimes we get all this information, and when you pare it down to let's do what the individual needs and what's working, and what strikes me in here is that you said I was using skills and she was flying through it, which means it was working.
Right.
So if you go back and are using skills again for those higher functioning things, it sounds like that would be, as you were saying, the thing that will work.
Yeah, keep going. I mean, the fact that she's flying through it is great.
Yeah.
Like, make sure that you go to the higher level stuff that will work. I'm also developing now, over this past 4-day weekend, I decided to start writing up a whole bunch of new lessons, which are not really content oriented. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we teach now is and in skills is content. It's kind of like teaching a child to tell a joke, teaching a child to lie, or whatever. Those are the skills that are important for cognitive. Or teaching a child to be able to see other people's perspective and so on. And they're very content oriented, and I'm trying to develop lessons that are more process oriented for the brain. So, for instance, I was just looking at some testing the other day, and I decided to develop some lessons to help this one child, where it's, the child has difficulty, let's say, scanning visually and then retaining certain things in their memory. And of course, through various exercises, we can improve the functioning of the brain. We can increase memory, we can increase processing speed, we can increase the ability to scan and retain information and then retrieve it later. So, I'm starting to write some lessons just for that, and I think that'll probably be very helpful to our higher functioning kids who, they know the content, they know how to tell jokes, they know how to interact and so on and so forth, but something is still keeping them from using it in their day-to-day lives.
Love it. We'll look forward to that.
Yeah.
We'll give you
Hopefully
another 4-day
soon.
weekend and see what you can do with it. Dr. Doreen, we've got a bunch of really great questions, so we're going to sort of rapid fire them here. Hi, are there any good resources to help adults increase their independent living skills, especially adults that have a difficult time keeping their room clean and showering? And thank you so much.
Yes, of course. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. First of all, I want to say that we have a really good adult program, and that's the type of stuff we also teach. Independent living skills are one of the areas that we focus on. So if you're anywhere near a CARD center, please get in touch with us, because we love our adults. We love to improve our independent living skills programs. We have functional, adaptive, vocational, all sorts of programs for adults. But basically, keeping your room clean and showering are individual and easy processes. And I'm wondering if, I think all of the videos that we have, with our adults program, what we did is we videotaped each lesson, and there's a video that matches the lesson online in our adults website, CARD Adults. But I don't know if we went into things like teaching how to keep your room clean and so on. But I would really recommend that you talk to one of our folks at the CARD Adult Center, and if you go on our website, you'll see that information, and they can perhaps give you some guidance, because these are both pretty simple things. And I mean, real quickly, you know, on room cleaning, for instance, you will reinforce. It's all about finding the right reinforcers. So you'll reinforce, let's say today, putting one thing away, tomorrow putting two things away, so that by the end of the week, you're reinforcing the adult putting 5 things away. And you just maintain that schedule until the room is clean. And that's what it's about. If you think about it, why do we clean our rooms? Nobody really enjoys the task of cleaning up. It's the results that we enjoy, that things look good and we have a sense of completion or order. Right. And then we can find things better the next time, you know? Yeah. And clearly for our teenagers, those reinforcers don't exist. In fact, they perhaps enjoy cluttered. I used to have a very cluttered room, and now I'm completely neat, you know? And so it's like you change, and the things that are reinforcing to you change. So.
Yeah. But finding the right reinforcer, I know with Jem, just yesterday, I was asking him, you know, there was something that I really needed him to be on and do a good job. And I said, you know, here's the thing, I would be willing to make it worth your while. What would make it worth your while? And he said, oh, I don't know, I guess this. Because it was something he thought I would be willing to cough up. But his reaction to it, I could tell it wasn't enough. And I said, right. Is that really going to be what gets it done? Because I really want you to be successful at this, you know, so what? And he said, well, you know what I really want? And then I knew I was in the neighborhood of what it was going to be, right? And people will hear that and go, well, then your whole life is going to be just about doing those things. No, then what my whole life is about is that he did the thing that mattered to me and he got what he wanted.
That's exactly right.
My life is good when it's like that.
That's exactly the point. That's absolutely right, Shannon. And you know, it's so funny that you say that, because most people, when their kids are, you know, 10, 11, 12 and up, all they do is they yell at their kids. Like, all you end up doing is yelling because the child didn't do something. Right. And then the only reason the child actually does it is to avoid your yelling. Yeah. So whether it's a matter of reinforcing the child with something positive, which is probably going to be much better for them in terms of development of self-esteem and all of that, or yelling at them all the time, you know, I would prefer to probably reinforce them positively. Yeah. Either way, the child is getting something out of it. They're either avoiding your wrath or they are getting some sort of reinforcer out of it. Now, some children naturally enjoy so much just your praise that they will do it because of that. Other children, they couldn't really care much about your praise. Other children, the sense of cleanliness, like I look at my son who's 16 and my daughter who's 14 now. My daughter's room is a mess always, like you can barely see the carpet. And my son's room is completely clean and organized always. And I know for him it's just a matter of he likes the cleanliness, if nothing else, you know, and that's what's reinforcing to him. Yeah. And there's nothing I could give Charlie that would be reinforcing enough for her to clean her room. So I just stay out of it. It's her room.
That's a good way of looking at it. Now, we had a viewer who wrote in specifically, and he says, last Saturday, I acted up at the grocery store with nothing happening. So any ideas for me? My family don't understand why I do sometimes still have some challenging behavior. And this is an individual that we know that watches the show and communicates through an AUG device. Okay. So I know he's watching right now. Do you have any questions for him before we delve into the question? Because we can take a break, have him type in, and then come back to it.
No, I mean, I don't have any questions yet. I kind of want to take the individual through some reasoning in terms of the types of things that might be causing one to overreact or have some sort of a upset tantrum if you're in the supermarket or if you're in a store. So, and then have you consider if any of those things kind of triggered the episode. Yeah. You know, so we could talk about that. I mean, I think there's always a reason. It's not that we just suddenly decide to explode, right? There's always a reason. Now, the reasons could be internal or external. External reasons obviously are easier to manipulate. So they could be things like, the lights hurt my eyes, the sound was too disturbing, or there was too many sounds. I was just physically overwhelmed because there were too many sensory stimuli coming at me. I wanted something that I couldn't reach or have access to for whatever reason. I saw someone that reminded me of a negative experience. You know, I saw something that reminded me maybe I'm eating too much or I'm not eating enough. Some memory was evoked by something that you saw. Internal things could simply be, you know, you didn't sleep enough the previous night. You had some sort of irritation, stomach ache. Something was causing an allergy that caused you to be irritated or so on. And those are just a few. I mean, if we sat together and discussed all the possible things that generally evoke a reaction, there are so many things. And it's important to try to find out what upset you, what caused you. And here's one way to look at it. What happened when you had the reaction or the behavior that you exhibited? And they don't really describe the behavior. They just, what was the word he used?
He says, I acted up.
Acted up. So, you know, first of all, how are you defining acted up? And what happened when you acted up? Because generally, we act up because we get something out of it.
You know, one of the things that I do on the show from time to time is I do the folded paper thing and tell parents about how to do the ABC at the top of the page.
Oh, sure.
To say what was the antecedent, so that they can track it for their therapist. What was the behavior, what was the consequence.
Right.
And the truth is we can do that for ourselves.
Absolutely.
There are times when I get upset and I don't know what was bothering me, and then I have to think back and go, okay, so what exactly is my deal?
That's a perfect way to do it. What happened before your behavior? What happened after your behavior? Because the things that happen before our behavior or the antecedents are usually the things that provoke us. But the only reason they provoke us is because they have some association with what happens after. Yeah. And what happens after is what generally maintains that behavior.
Yeah. So maybe if you have an opportunity to write into us and give us some insight into what happened before,
right?
What was the behavior actually, what was your acting up, and what happened afterwards. Somebody wrote in and said, hello, wonderful program. My son sees a great therapist, speech therapist once a week for an hour, and OT 3 times a week for an hour, also has speech at school twice a week for 30 minutes in a group session. That is a complete waste of time. The elementary school does not know any summer camps that help with a child with receptive, expressive language help.
Well, we are doing summer camps and summer programs across all of our sites. So if your child just needs a summer camp program with, you know, and they want something that's individualized, then please contact one of our card offices. Otherwise, we would kind of need to know what location or region you're at. You know, there's a very good resource called Love My Provider that it's an online resource, and if you go on there, lmp.com or lovemyprovider.com, just put that in, and you will find that they have several thousand resources, including schools in all regions of the states. And they also have a live chat feature where someone will get online with you and help you find the right resource. So that's probably the best place to go.
Wonderful advice. I want to take this next one. Hi ladies, my son has been with CARD for 2 years, 40 hours. He's been doing okay, but lately he's been hitting kids at school, siblings also, and he seems to like it. Before he gets a reaction, he has that enjoyment in his face. Nothing triggers it, he just runs and hits them. Please help. He is through the Garden Grove office, so these behaviors really discourage me because we would be on a good path and then a behavior like this occurs. He sleeps great, on a strict diet, I'm doing everything. Why does this happen? So, and don't give up, and this is very typical stuff. Now, usually when we hit other, you know, it was such a great description that this parent gave. So what triggers it is the sight of another child. That's what's triggering it. Why? Because what happens after the behavior is rewarding somehow. So you have to look at, so when he sees another child, he remembers what he gets out of it, and then he does the behavior in order to get that out of it. Now, so the question is, what does he get out of it?
And it could be just as simple as he gets negative attention. Sometimes it's very hard for us to understand that negative attention is just as reinforcing as positive attention for some of our children. And sometimes when the child doesn't know any better how to get attention, they will just do bad things or challenging things in order to get you to attend to them. This is like any younger child who will see you interacting with another child, and they will be jealous, and they'll want to take the attention away from the other child somehow. So they'll go and hit the other child, and then you have to yell at them, but they're actually now getting attention from it. So really the key is what happens afterwards. How do you deal with it each time that it happens? And then once we know that, the function, once that we can identify the reason it happens, and then we can alter the behavior by changing that function. Whatever it is that consequence, you need to not give that consequence. We have to change that and give a different consequence, because clearly that's what's maintaining it.
Okay, wonderful.
And don't give up, and don't be discouraged. This kind of stuff happens. It happens to typical children as well. It's just part of growing up and part of understanding the rules of our environment.
Yeah.
And our kids have a very different way of seeing the environment, and they seek out different types of reinforcers.
And kids will continue to engage in challenging behavior, and that's a sign of growth. It's not a sign that you're not doing everything.
Yeah, we all do. Adults engage in challenging behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody does. So it's just, we engage in challenging behavior when that's the only way we can get a particular reinforcer, and we're frustrated, so we, do bad things.
Absolutely. Another person writes in and said, hello, I have a 5-year-old daughter. When we go grocery shopping, she insists on getting the biggest bag of everything.
Right.
And also insists on holding the bag. I can't just give her a few pieces of whatever the snack is. She will scream and tantrum if she's not holding the big bag. Thanks for your help.
Right. This is such a great question, because it really shows how our children can control us. It's not even about her behavior, it's about the effect of the behavior on you. So let's do an ABC, as Shannon said, or sort of a functional behavior assessment on your behavior. Because what happens with your behavior is that you give her a bag, and if you try to take away a bag, that's your behavior, taking away the bag, she'll scream. And so she's punishing. That screaming is punitive to you. So in order to avoid that screaming, you let her have the bag. So her behavior, yes, you now want to manipulate her behavior, but her behavior is controlling yours. So that's the key to ABA, is that you never let the child's challenging behavior control you. You never let challenging behavior control you. And by that, I mean you never let a child's challenging behavior alter you and what you're going to do. Now you're in public, so it's a lot of our kids are very intelligent, and they figure out that in public places my mom gives in because
rather
it's
than die of embarrassment.
Because it's
Yes.
embarrassing, and because we're all afraid that someone's going to come arrest us. I never forget that my youngest we were on an airplane, and she was extremely jet lagged. We had a very long flight, and she was very little. And they gave dinner, and she threw the plates because she didn't want to eat it or whatever, and the plate fell and cracked and all this, and she just started having a massive tantrum, and I picked her up and took her to the bathroom and just stayed in the bathroom and put cold water on her face, and she went into like the biggest tantrum of her life. Meanwhile, we're in an airplane, and it's right behind the captain's the cockpit, and I was like, oh my God, they're going to come and arrest me, because they're going to think, what is this mom doing to this child in this bathroom? But you know what? It was the only thing I could do was let her tantrum it out. And I just let her scream. And then finally we came out, and I swear I must have lost weight and aged. And she wore herself out and then went to sleep. But you cannot react any differently when someone tantrums. You need to, in this particular case, let her scream and tantrum. There is in fact, turn it around. If she screams and tantrums, you remove her from the store. Like, turn the process around. She can only now stay in the store if she doesn't scream and tantrum. It's really simple. And actually, to kind of help you on the antecedent side, give her some sort of bag of things that she could just hold on to prior to entering the store. I'm not sure if she is just holding the bag or actually eating from the bag, because you don't say anything about, yeah, it says I can't just give her a few pieces of whatever the snack is. What I would recommend you do is take a snack from home in a plastic bag, in a small little Ziploc bag, and tell her this is all you're going to get. And if she starts to want a bag and scream and tantrum, you leave. It's really that simple. So that means you're not teaching her this behavior while you're grocery shopping. You can't do that. You will need to teach her this behavior just during a time that you're focused on teaching her this behavior. A lot of times we think we can teach things during the course of normal life. Teaching things takes a lot of effort, and it won't allow you to continue shopping. You might have to leave. But I guarantee you, if you every time she tantrums, you pick her up and leave, she'll stop tantruming.
Yeah.
Because what she'll learn is, I'm not going to get to be in the supermarket, and I definitely am not going to get my bag.
Yeah. She speaks truth. I've talked many times before on the show that we went through a thing with Jem where we would go into a store and he wanted to see the birthday cakes, and he would punch me in the head, and and it was the whole thing, and we had to call in the SOS team from CARD. But that was exactly, we put in place a plan in which I would take him to the grocery store and be ready for the behavior, and I was not grocery shopping, and it took maybe a week, and that behavior ended.
It was gone.
And it was gone. And it was a hard week. I'm going to be honest with you, it was a very hard week, but it was better than, he's taller than me now. If he was still punching me in the head, we couldn't be in the same home together.
No.
So it's better to take care of these things.
When they're little.
Go, have somebody babysit, go stock up your cupboards so that you don't have to go to the grocery store for a week, and then get on this behavior, and it will work.
And don't avoid the situation. Hit it dead on. Like, don't avoid it at all. I remember with my kids when they were growing up, if I had a behavioral outburst of some type, I would try to really memorize the scenario and memorize the antecedents and consequence, everything, and reenact the antecedents. I would provoke the behavior. In fact, that's what we do here.
Yes.
You specifically provoke a behavior in order to be able to deal with it correctly.
Absolutely. Now, we had our viewer write back in about the Saturday, because we only have a couple of minutes here. He didn't give us a lot of information, but he said I was on the floor and that he started to be sick the day after.
Oh.
So
you were physically probably not doing well.
Yeah.
I mean, you were not feeling well, and you can't blame yourself for that. If you were able to recognize earlier that you're not feeling well, and if you were able to communicate, I need to go home and rest, then you probably wouldn't have had a meltdown.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot of times with us because we can't tell. I mean, any of us, we all will have meltdowns when we're not feeling well. Yeah. Because just our resistance is less, and our ability to cope with everything around us is less. And learn something from this. If you, again, in the future feel like you're about to lose it and you don't know why, maybe just go home and rest. Yeah. Maybe that'll be a good process that'll help you overcome whatever it is that's making you feel bad.
Yeah, now that you've felt what that feels like, I mean, sometimes you don't know, but if you feel it, you felt it once, and if you feel it again, you'll begin to recognize the symptoms you'll be able to stop yourself, have stop points for yourself from having a meltdown.
And that's what you just said, Shannon, is probably one of the most important things we learn, is recognizing our own red flags, our own signs. Like, when do I need to stop? I often will go to not often, but a couple times a year, I'll go to a point of like complete exhaustion, at which point I have to sleep 3 days. Yeah. And I recognize the signs. I just can't stop at that moment. But the first step is recognizing the signs. And if you have now just had an episode and then you became sick, then recognize the signs in yourself.
Yeah. And I love that you said, and forgive yourself.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
We all have to do that.